Here's a thought. That huge bestseller, Sapiens, the brief history of humankind everyone seems to have read, how much of it is solid history, and how much maybe is really just compelling opinion dressed up as fact?
That's a really important question to ask, especially with books that become so influential.
Exactly. And we believe that some books, even the most popular ones, must be challenged. So for this critique, we're using, where it fits, a step-by-step critical thinking framework. It helps map the claims Harari makes directly to the evidence he provides.
That framework comes from the work of Richard Paul and Linda Elder on critical thinking. We're also applying an intellectual framework, drawing heavily from Mortimer J. Adler's ideas about knowledge versus opinion.
And we don't stop there. We'll also use the Golden Rule and even the Preamble to the U.S. Constitution to look for ethical asymmetries or social impacts. And we wrap it all up with a logical analysis and aim for a balanced view.
It's quite a thorough process. And to help us manage that complexity, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation. This is powered by Google's NotebookLM, allowing for a, well, deeper and more dynamic book critique.
Okay, so let's dig into Sapiens. The core idea, the thing that made it resonate with so many people, is Harari's argument about Homo sapiens. He says we conquer the world not through brute strength, but because we develop this unique knack for large-scale, flexible cooperation.
Right. And crucially, he argues this cooperation hinges entirely on our ability to believe in shared, well, he calls them fictions, things we collectively agree exist, like gods, nations, money.
Even human rights fall into that category for him. It's a huge sweeping narrative, isn't it?
Absolutely massive. And he structures this vast history around four major turning points or revolutions.
Yeah, there's a cognitive revolution way back around 70,000 BCE, then the agricultural revolution, maybe 10,000 BCE.
Followed by what he calls the unification of humankind, starting around 34 CE, and then kicking off the modern era, the scientific revolution, around 1543 CE.
It's a neat structure, but, and this is where the critique starts, when you really start mapping his claims to the actual hard evidence, things get a little shaky.
That's where the critical thinking framework becomes so useful. We have to ask, where's the empirical support? Now, to be fair, some claims are pretty well backed.
Like the megafauna extinctions.
Exactly. His argument that early humans contributed significantly to wiping out large animals? Well, the archaeological record largely supports that. You see H.S. Sapiens arrive, and shortly after, boom, the big creatures disappear. The timing is quite consistent across continents.
So that's a claim with strong evidence, but contrast that with, say, the cognitive revolution itself. That pivotal moment around 70,000 years ago, where we supposedly developed abstract thought and language.
Harari himself points out the main limitation there. He says, look, mostly what we have from that period are bones, fossils.
Right, so how do you get from bones to proving complex language and shared myths?
Well, you have to speculate. A lot. He builds this really engaging story about how language might have evolved for gossip, for creating myths. But the simple truth, acknowledged by many academics, is we just don't have the artifact or data to prove it happened exactly that way.
So a core pillar of his entire book rests heavily on interpretation, maybe even imagination, rather than hard data.
It's a significant weakness from an evidence perspective. And even when the data is there, his interpretation can be, let's say, highly provocative.
You mean the agricultural revolution, how he frames it not as progress, but as this evolutionary trap?
Precisely. It's a fascinating take that settling down to farm gave us more collective power, sure, but individually. We might have become less healthy, our diets poorer, more vulnerable to disease.
It definitely makes you think, but is it the whole picture?
Probably not. While there's evidence for some of those downsides, framing 2 million years of human development and adaptation as essentially a big mistake, well, it feels a bit sensationalized. It simplifies a very complex transition.
And that brings us to a common critique from academic reviewers, doesn't it? The general feeling seems to be
that whenever Harari's facts are broadly correct, they often aren't particularly new or groundbreaking insights from a scholarly perspective.
But when he does strike out on his own, offering those unique, sweeping interpretations,
that's often where specialists in those fields find issues. They point to inaccuracies, oversimplifications, sometimes quite serious ones.
Okay, so this gap between the compelling story and the sometimes thin proof leads us nicely into the next layer of our critique. The intellectual framework, drawing from Mortimer Adler. Specifically, this idea of knowledge versus opinion.
Right. It's about the level of certainty. Real knowledge, Adler would argue, requires truth beyond a reasonable doubt. But a lot of Sapiens, especially the big explanations.
Operates more at the level of opinion. Maybe very well argued, very persuasive opinion, but still opinion presented almost like established fact.
I think that's fair. His theories about how religion started, the precise mechanics of the cognitive revolution, even his predictions about AI in the future, these are powerful hypotheses. But do they meet that high bar of truth beyond a shadow of a doubt?
Probably not. They often lack that level of rigorous, undeniable proof you'd need for historical or scientific certainty. They're great narratives, but maybe not always rigorous history.
And this connects to what you might call the wisdom problem in the book. If your whole approach is strictly materialist, reducing everything to biology, chemistry, utility.
Then where do things like meaning, purpose, or inherent human dignity fit in?
Exactly. A purely materialist view struggles to provide a solid foundation for those concepts. If things like human rights or moral obligations are just useful fictions that help the group survive.
Then they don't have any inherent value. They're just tools.
Pretty much. There's no intrinsic reason why someone deserves dignity other than it being collectively advantageous. It leaves very little room for transcendence or deeper meaning.
This lack of a deeper foundation really shows up when we apply the golden rule, the reciprocity test. If we're asked to accept his purely materialist view.
Would he, or secular readers who agree with him, be okay having their own deeply held values, maybe democracy, or scientific rationalism described merely as useful collective delusions?
Probably not. It feels inherently dismissive, doesn't it? Especially his treatment of religious belief as just fiction. It lacks empathy for the profound role faith plays in billions of lives.
It reduces something deeply complex and personal to a simple evolutionary mechanism. And we see a similar pattern elsewhere.
Like his view of agricultural societies.
Yeah, painting them as almost entirely exploitative systems that just trap people. It overlooks the rise of law, complex social structures, mutual aid, incredible cultural achievements. It's just too simplistic.
And looking ahead, his predictions about AI creating a useless class while raising important issues about automation.
There's often a lack of, shall we say, constructive empathy. It diagnoses a potentially bleak future, but offers little in terms of how we might navigate that ethically or compassionately for those most affected.
So, if we use something like the U.S. Preamble aims like forming a more perfect union, ensuring domestic tranquility, does Harari's framework help or hinder?
Well, the constant dismissal of shared values, be it religion, national identity, cultural traditions as mere fictions, does that really build cohesion?
Arguably, it could do the opposite. It might fuel cynicism and fragmentation if everything we collectively believe in is just seen as a tool for manipulation or control.
And those stark predictions about mass unemployment, genetic castes, a future devoid of meaning, they don't exactly foster tranquility or collective hope, do they?
No, they tend to provoke anxiety. He's brilliant at dissecting the past and projecting trends, but offers very little in terms of a positive vision for building a better future or preserving liberty within that future.
It's a powerful deconstruction, but weak on reconstruction.
Absolutely. Which actually is a good moment to mention. If you want to continue exploring these kinds of ideas, check out Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel. We offer AI book analyses, summaries, critiques, and podcasts, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
A great resource for deeper dives. Okay, so we've talked evidence, we've talked philosophy and ethics. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of the logic itself. Are there specific logical fallacies that weaken his arguments?
Oh, yes. This is where we can really see the narrative sometimes overriding rigorous reasoning.
A big one that crops up is hasty generalization. He often takes quite limited archaeological finds.
Like a few new tools or maybe some cave art.
And extrapolates enormous conclusions about the inner lives, the cognitive abilities, the social structures of entire populations across millennia. Finding a bead doesn't automatically prove the existence of complex trade networks or shared myths in the way he sometimes implies.
It's stretching the evidence too thin, making leaps that aren't fully supported.
Definitely. Then there's a tendency towards false dichotomy, especially comparing hunter-gatherers and farmers.
Right, the original affluent society versus the miserable farmers trapped by wheat.
It's presented as this stark choice between a kind of prehistoric paradise and agricultural drudgery. But reality was far more complex, wasn't it? Hunter-gatherer life had immense hardships, high infant mortality, constant environmental threats, vulnerability to famine.
And farming, despite its drawbacks, brought stability, food surpluses, the possibility of larger, more complex societies.
Right.
He wasn't all bad.
Exactly. It was a complex trade-off, not a simple good versus bad scenario. presenting it as such as a false dichotomy.
And underlying so much of the book is a form of reductionist reasoning, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. Taking incredibly complex phenomena, religion, politics, economics, art, and reducing them almost entirely to their supposed evolutionary function or biological basis.
It strips away so much nuance, so much of the human experience, culture, individual agency, historical contingency.
It makes for a neat, simple explanation. Everything is just about survival and reproduction, but it often feels like an oversimplification of history's richness.
We also spotted a potential circularity in the core argument about cooperation.
Yes. The logic goes something like this. Sapiens are dominant because we cooperate flexibly in large groups. How do we know this cooperation is so effective? Because we became dominant.
It loops back on itself. Success is defined by dominance, and dominance is used to prove the success of the method. It confirms we won, but doesn't deeply explain the why beyond the mechanism itself.
And woven through all of this, there's arguably a degree of confirmation bias. The evidence and interpretations presented consistently seem to favor his overarching materialist, somewhat deterministic worldview.
Counter-evidence or alternative perspectives, especially those that might involve non-material factors, often seem downplayed or explained away within that same framework.
And the cumulative effect of all this, the dismissal of traditional values as myths, the reductionism, the bleak predictions, could be quite significant for readers.
You mean it could contribute to a sense of meaninglessness or cultural fragmentation? If all our shared beliefs are just fictions, what holds us together?
Precisely. It leaves us with some really big, unresolved questions. If shared fictions aren't the whole story, what does explain human cooperation and culture? And perhaps more importantly, how do societies maintain meaning and moral purpose if the foundations are constantly being described as elaborate illusions?
Okay, so bringing this all together, we need a balanced conclusion. We have to acknowledge the book's strengths.
Without a doubt, Sapiens is a publishing phenomenon for a reason. It's incredibly engaging, accessible, and a brilliant synthesis of information from vastly different fields. Harari makes big history exciting.
And he absolutely raises vital questions for our time about technology, inequality, the environment. It gets people thinking and talking, which is valuable.
Definitely valuable. But the weaknesses we've discussed are significant. The lack of truly original scholarly contribution in many areas, the reliance on speculation, the sometimes sensationalist interpretations. These are serious points raised by academic critics.
And that persistent materialist reductionism really does limit the scope. It struggles to account for the full spectrum of human experience, especially the aspects that transcend pure biology or utility.
So if you've read Sapiens and felt maybe something was missing, or you're looking for alternatives that don't rely so heavily on that reductionist view,
We'd strongly recommend looking into works that tackle knowledge, truth, and wisdom more directly. Mortimer Adler's 10 Philosophical Mistakes, or his Truth and Religion, are excellent starting points for challenging some underlying assumptions.
and if you're interested in big history, but perhaps want something with a different emphasis or more methodological caution, you could explore David Christian's work, or the classic, incredibly detailed cultural histories by Will and Ariel Durant.
Just to reiterate for clarity, we performed this critique using a systematic and precise framework. Our aim was to ensure a comprehensive, impartial, and balanced logical analysis of the book's arguments and methods.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. What really are the consequences for individuals, for society, of widely accepting historical narratives that reduce our complex lives, our deepest values, our sense of purpose, down to mere biology and utility?
Definitely something to reflect on. Click the link on screen for the full, in-depth book analysis. Please subscribe, share, purchase via the link if you're interested, and always think rationally.
And don't forget to check out the many genre-based book podcasts over at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.